We have now reached the moment in this ceremony when we honor an extraordinary individual whose life's work has advanced the cause of education while upholding TC's core mission to foster excellence and equity in the fields we serve. Among those honored at past ceremonies were Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Coretta Scott King, Senator George Mitchell, Pete Seeger, Thomas Friedman, Gail Collins, Spike Lee, Linda Darling Hammond, Temple Grandin, and the Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts. This year, we honor 4 preeminent scholars and practitioners: Thomas Frieden, Chris D. Gutierrez, Susan Fisk, and Sandra Jackson-Dumont. I'm pleased to welcome TC Professor Olga Hubbard, joined by Provost Thomas James, to introduce Sandra Jackson-Dumont. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and congratulations, graduates. It is my pleasure to invite our medalist, Sandra Jackson-Dumont, to join us at the podium. Sandra Jackson-Dumont, when you returned to New York in 2014, after 8 remarkable years as the Kayla Skinner Deputy Director for Education and Public Programs, as well as Adjunct Curator for Modern and Contemporary Art at the Seattle Art Museum, you cited an unlikely 14th century painting, The Flagellation, as your artistic role model. It seems that medieval viewers were so singularly disturbed by this work that they clawed, scratched, and gouged it, leaving behind marks that are still visible today. In 2 decades as a curator and art educator, you have tirelessly championed your vision of art that viscerally engages, disrupts, inspires, and challenges the public. You have held leadership roles in Seattle, at the Studio Museum in Harlem, at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and since 2014, as the Frederick P. and Sandra P. Rose Chairman of Education at New York City Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's very impressive. At all these sites, you have quite literally implemented your vision of museums as places where people can experience the range of emotions, from quiet reflection to dancing in the galleries. Your work has brought such experiences not only to traditional art patrons, but also to an increasingly diverse public of all ages. In Seattle, you spearheaded a multi-year research and engagement initiative to broaden active participation among 18 to 35-year-olds. You curated wildly successful exhibitions of contemporary artists, ranging from LaToya Ruby Fraser's evocative documentation of the wounds of racism and poverty in Western Pennsylvania, to William Cordova's colossal Machu Picchu After Dark, crafted from discarded vintage stereo speakers. And through innovations such as the famed quarterly remix Art and Music Soirée, you introduced hip-hop and jazz to the museum-going experience. These innovations have helped to erase distinctions between cultural institutions as repositories of the past and laboratories of the future. In an era when we seek to create meaningful experience for each and every museum goer, it is no surprise that the nation's premier cultural institution has turned to you to lead its mission to educate learners of all ages and backgrounds.
Sandra Jackson-Dumont, for the joy you communicate about all art and its centrality in the human experience, for your genius in conceiving of education as something that must inspire both intellectually and emotionally, and above all, for reminding us that art must be dissected, challenged, debated, and yes, touched, like that medieval painting of long ago. We proudly present you with the Teachers College Medal for Distinguished Service. I'll set this back on.
Wow, I wear glasses to see, but not to read, so I'm going to take a quick look at the genius that's in this room. Wow. So now I'm going to take my glasses off. Thank you, Olga, who I've known for, we counted 20 years. We don't look as old as I guess we are. President Furman, Provost James, the selection committee, faculty, members of the Board of Trustees of this great institution, thank you. Finally, I want to thank the graduates for your steadfast commitment to study, research, and practice. But mostly, I want to thank you for sitting through the next 13 minutes of me trying to pretend that I'm not scared of you. In all seriousness, I'm truly honored and humbled by this acknowledgement. Really, everything in me wants to say there are others more deserving. In fact, that was my first response. But I can hear my mother, Edie Jackson, in one ear, and the noted scholar, Deborah Willis, who's here today, whispering, "Just say thank you, girl." So I thank you, and I accept this honor in actually their names, as well as the names of other people who have helped me. So given Teachers College unwavering commitment to social justice, equity, and education, let's begin by saying that we are living through a very dangerous time. Everyone in this room is in one way or another aware of that. We are in a revolutionary situation. No matter how unpopular that word has become in this country, the society in which we live is desperately menaced from within. To any citizen of this country who figures himself as responsible, and particularly those of us who deal with the minds and hearts of young people, we must be prepared to go for broke. Or to put it another way, you must understand that in the attempt to correct so many generations of bad faith and cruelty, when it is operating not only in the classroom but in society, you will meet the most fantastic, the most brutal, and the most determined resistance. There is no point in pretending that it won't happen. The paradox of education is precisely this: that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which is being educated. The purpose of education, finally, is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself, to make his own decisions, to ask questions of the universe, and then learn to live with those questions. It's the only way he receives identity. But no society is really anxious to have that kind of person around that asks questions. What societies really ideally want is a citizenry which will simply obey the rules of society. If a society succeeds in this, that society is about to perish. The obligation of anyone who thinks of himself as responsible is to examine society, try to change it, and to fight it, at no matter what risk. This is the only hope society has. These are timely issues I'm talking about here. Only I'm afraid that these are not my words. They belong to the noted literary figure James Baldwin, who spoke these words in a speech he delivered in what he called a talk to teachers in 1963. These words were spoken well before I was born, or my mother would say before I was even thought of. Yet they could have been uttered yesterday. I'm a fan of timelessness when it comes to style and grace and art. Timelessness is what artists are celebrated for, but in this case, this is the very thing that I find disturbing. More than 50 years have passed, and those words still ring true. I find it so incredibly unfortunate that structural racism continues to be an ongoing normative in our lives, rather than the flavor of a fleeting moment. So I ask, what keeps us in this perpetual state of appearing to go for broke, but not really putting forth the currency necessary to pay it forward? We are missing the mark. in building a community of free thinkers. What is making that happen? The Baldwin text is not simply a timely issue, it's a call to action. Frederick Douglass said it's easier to build a strong child than to repair broken men. As you sit there in your beautiful caps and gowns, looking amazing and feeling accomplished because you actually are very accomplished, I want you to think about what you will do to eliminate the possibility of this text ringing true 50 years from now. I know, this is heavy for a moment we're supposed to be celebrating, but our work is serious business. As much as it's kids' play, it really isn't kids' play. We are building communities of thinkers. We're investing in healthy communities, and we are the people that do heavy lifting. So we must be centered. We must be fortified in our skills, our craft, and our understanding of why we do what we do, not just how we do what we do. I feel like I'm, in some cases, like preaching to the choir, no pun intended, from the pulpit. Not funny? No? Okay. But I have to say, I'm tormented by the fact that this text is relevant despite the cadres of people studying how to right the metaphorical ship. I ask, how is it that so many people sacrifice so much for us? For me, I'll make it personal, so that I can stand here today. But we still stand in pools of hate, injustice, and inequity. The answer I keep coming to is the complicated notion of fear. Fear is a river that often runs between who we are and who we should be. Fear also catalyzes the adrenaline that builds bridges that transport people over those rivers of fear, those intellectual, emotional, physical fears, into places of freedom. So as I close, I leave you with a personal story that seems apropos for this incredible sanctuary. About a year ago, I gave a talk that I was terrified to give because I had to lean so far into discomfort. It gave new definition to honesty even for me, and I'm known for being extremely honest. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. So here it goes. When I was about 12 years old, I prayed for rhythm. I know that sounds funny. I really did pray for rhythm. I grew up going to a host of churches. The music was very different at the various churches. In the morning, I went to a Baptist church where you clapped a certain way. In the afternoon, I went to an African Methodist Episcopal church where I learned about history, and you clapped another way. You really didn't clap, you kind of just swayed from side to side. And then in the evening, I went to Church of God in Christ with my godmother, which was like a full-on concert. I mean, it's a holiness church where you dance, et cetera, et cetera. There was drum, bass, organs, all kinds of things. People ran up and down the aisles. It was very amazing and cerebral. The clapping in that church was double time, meaning it was twice as fast as the clapping in the Baptist church. I could not catch the beat to save my life. I literally stood in the pew and would be like, and I tried, and I tried, and I tried, and being we were at church, I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed. And my friends, they all had rhythm, they had style, they had it all, and I just could not, for the life of me, catch a beat. I literally closed my eyes and prayed. The more I prayed, the more I practiced. We call this persistence in education. Hindsight is 20/20 always. So there was this amazing gospel concert happening around me, and I practiced and practiced and practiced, and this went on for months. This happened at home. I practiced. I get in a mirror. But I was harboring this incredible fear that people might find out that I was a part of not Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation, but the rhythm-less nation. Then it happened. One day, I got it. Yes. God anointed me with rhythm. It was like manna from heaven. I was washed over with rhythm, and now I can't even get off beat to save my life. I tell you this story, and it sounds really funny, but in my work, I see this all of the time. There's always at least one young person with extreme focus. They're curious, alert, and slightly terrified of not being able to get it, whatever their it is. They are terrified of getting something wrong or not doing something right. And then there's the artist, the musician, the scholar, the teacher, et cetera, who also feels like their next body of work just might not cut it. They've written an amazing essay, they've published it in an incredible journal, but that next piece may not cut it. This common theme ran throughout my life, for most of my life. It isn't a lack of confidence I'm talking about, or the fear of failure, or the fear of success. It's a lesser-known fear, the fear of being found out. I was running this idea by a friend who's a psychologist, and she told me that this was actually a thing. I learned that the fear of being found out is often called the imposter syndrome. There's an early study dating back to the 70s. She said it's not a clinical disorder, it's more like a phenomenon. Apparently 1 in 5 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, have this. People who have reportedly experienced this are pretty successful people. People like business leader Sheryl Sandberg, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. There's even rumor that Albert Einstein experienced this and talked about it on his deathbed. In fact, research indicates that the fear of being found out syndrome is reserved for highly achieving people. It seems 70% of that larger number of people who find themselves experiencing this phenomenon fall into that gifted category. What lies beneath this malady is the anxiety that one's work isn't good enough, or perhaps that there is an inherent inability to do any good work at all. It was early in my career where I was introduced to this concept, where I took a 360 review, where you have different people review you, they write all this stuff about you, it's anonymous, you fill out the same forms, they send it in, and in my case, the program I was in, they assigned a psychologist and a marketing executive to look at our information. And the results of my test indicated with no uncertainty that I had the fear of being found out. I almost argued with the psychologist who reported the results. Yes, I was anxious sometimes, but I wasn't hiding. I felt like they were saying I was a fraud, I was a liar. But when I finally sat down and thought about the results, I realized that fear really did shape many of my actions, behaviors, perceptions. I just didn't call it fear. Now I want to be clear. I'm not talking about faking it until you make it. I'm not talking about code switching. I'm not even talking about shape-shifting between worlds. We all do that very well. Those I consider to be tools and strategies. The fear of being found out is when you work really, really hard and you still somehow feel like you just can't cut it. That despite your hard work, somebody's going to come from behind the metaphorical door and say, aha, I caught you. You're a fake. Someone's going to walk up to you in a crowded room and say, you stole someone else's invitation to this party. So to mitigate that, I really dotted my I's, crossed my T's. And the fear and anxiety that I felt during that time is this fear and anxiety I've seen in the faces of countless friends, colleagues, parents, students, et cetera, this idea that I might not be good enough. I'm not certain if this development of my fear of being found out was informed by the fact that I was born into a family with very few resources, or if it's a symptom of choosing to work in a world or an industry filled with luxury goods and extreme wealth. I may have been resource poor, but I was intellectually rich. There was a time when I would not have felt comfortable working in the places that I've worked, or even standing before you here today. So when I walk up the stairs at this great museum that I have the privilege of working at, called the Metropolitan Museum of Art, almost 150 years old, my 12-year-old self is kind of impressed. It's not because I have this cool gig or this amazing job. It's because honestly, like many people entering the halls of a museum or an incredible university, I once felt extremely out of place, and now I don't. My discomfort wasn't about the museum. It was about what the museum meant in my life. It was about my personal history juxtaposed next to this place. So when I talk about my 12-year-old self being proud, it's about realizing what I should have known a long time ago, and what I hope that you know now, that my discomfort is what makes me comfortable, and more importantly, I belong wherever I want to be. I was experiencing exactly what Baldwin was talking about when he said, as one becomes conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated. Over time, what I've come to realize is that many people have this very thing. At the very least, they have a little piece of themselves that shares the same fears that I carried with me in secret for years. Some never cross the river of fear, while others learn to build many bridges. I suppose if I'm looking at this critically, I can look at the fear of being found out phenomenon in a number of ways. It was a motivator. It motivated the 12-year-old girl to persist to the point of finding rhythm where she had none. And it taught me to use my imagination as a skill and a tool. For those of you that have felt this phenomenon, one, you are not alone. You are actually a part of a tribe of people who are in the consistent pursuit of excellence. You are driven. Two, because you've struggled with this issue, you are likely an incredibly empathetic human being. And three, relax, because the real you, independent of pretense, is the freest, most efficient way of living. Be your authentic self, your best self. Go for broke on yourself. There are times when I think the fear of being found out is a farce, a completely fictional phenomenon. The only reason I acknowledge it is because 50 years later, Baldwin's essay is still relevant. I no longer have the fear of being found out. I've had nothing to hide. This is me. It's always been me. Persistent, honest, committed, and hardworking, and I bet that's you. Baldwin would say that I'm a product of the real purpose of education, which is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for him or herself and make his own decisions. The truth of the matter is that my 12-year-old self would have just been fine. Thank you, and congratulations to the class of 2016.